usually see this?
Is it going to YouTube?
It's streaming now. Yes, we're just testing here and seeing if this is working. We're having some technical problems here.
It's not showing on YouTube.
Okay, so wait it.
Can you talk? Can you speak?
Hello. Okay. Is it working? Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa sahabatihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Subhanaka la fahma lana illa ma fahamtana innaka antal jawwadul karim. Qul rabbi zidni ilma. So sorry we're late. As usual, we're having difficulties. With our multimedia. So our technical people are not here, and I'm not a technical people. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So now we've reached to our 23rd halaqah. And previously we talked about conversions, some of the major conversions of the people who accepted Islam early on in the Meccan period, and then we also talked about some of the stances of the major tribal chieftains and people of authority and influence among Quraysh and their stance. And so continuing with the early Meccan period, now we're looking at about the 4th and 5th year of after the Risala, after the sending of Rasulullah and his being given Nabuwa. And so conversions continue, and they increase, and what happens is that as the da'wah continues, we already listened to the Islam of some of the important people who accepted Islam early on. And so those people who were closer to fitrah and whose hearts were not hardened with arrogance and pride and tribal, confinement, confined within those perimeters, and they could see a bit beyond that by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they started accepting Islam. And it's not like all the downtrodden people, all accepted Islam and all the haughty people stayed away. Mostly the people who were accepting Islam were people who are of, as it always is, the du'afa, or the weak people, the people who are not in a position of strength and position in society. But there were people of position in society, but not the big chieftains. They were not accepting Islam. Not even Abu Talib, who was the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and however, Hamza was, as we mentioned, he was an exception to that. However, he was not considered, he was a great warrior and he was highly respected from a very noble family, but still, he wasn't one of the main chieftains of the tribes. So these conversions continue and they increase, and the disbelievers remain staunch in their denial. And it's important to also look, when we look at the seerah, we look at the Quran which is being revealed during that period. Okay? And we probably mentioned earlier on that the Meccan period, and particularly in the early period, what are the main themes? Of course, the main theme, the overall running theme, is the theme of Tawheed. And it was the main issue, or the main bone of contention with Quraysh. We have idols from the time of Amr ibn Luhay, Al-Mujarran, and then onward. So these idols became more and more part of their rituals, and they became ingrained, in their form of religion. And so they were quite adamant in holding on to that. Number one. Number two, the very fact that this life is not the real life. We're not here. Now this is very significant because we have the same situation today. It hasn't really changed. So as we've probably mentioned in other hopefully I don't know if I mentioned in this particular class, but there's basically three main differences between people of Iman and people without Iman. People who live by deen, people who believe in Allah, and people who do not. So number one, or if you will, the difference between a Muslim and a non-Muslim. So number one is that we believe in a creator. There's a creator to this universe, right? And of course the atheists don't believe that. Number two, not only believe in a creator, but we believe that the creator has not created us and just left us alone. He has sent guidance. He had a purpose for creating us, and the purpose is that we are a manifestation of his submission, a manifestation of his obedience, that we should live a life accordingly. And this would be a manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power and might and wisdom, etc. So we believe that for that, books have been sent, prophets have been sent. And the other camp, no, we don't believe in that. We don't believe in revelation. We don't believe in prophets. We believe that we have intelligence and we figure out everything for ourselves. Okay? So in other words, we have a set fixed way of life and they don't. An example, we have a dress code, right? We have a thing which is known as awra. There's a particular part of the human body which needs to be covered according to Islamic law, right? From the knee to the navel in men and the entire body of the woman, with the exception of the face and the hands and perhaps the feet, with those slight differences in the viewpoint of the ulama. In any case, the entire body basically of the woman with the exception of the hands and the face. Okay. Now, if you look back in this very country, if you look back 100 years ago, the women here in America, that's pretty much how they used to dress. And traditionally you would find that men would be dressed less than women, right? So for my own grandmother, for example, you know, when she was a girl, she used to wear ankle-length dresses. And if any woman were to wear a dress over the ankles, that would be like, hey, what's that? You know, people would raise an uproar. And then some women probably had the audacity and, you know, faced, you know, just like we see today, the feminist movement, you know, women will do outlandish things, say, no, this is the norm, it's our bodies, we do with it what we want, and so forth, right? So some woman back in those days the audaciousness of that era would be to raise the dress like up to the mid-calf. Oh, this is terrible, you know, and people would have made it. And then people got used to it, and then ultimately it became the norm. So we went from the ankles then up to the mid-knee. Then somebody rose the dress up to the knee, and then they would have had, you know, it would have been a trauma for a while, and then people would have just gotten used to that. So in other words, they don't have an actual system, they don't have perimeters which are set and fixed. It's just how they feel, you know, at that mode or at that period of time. And so as time progresses, the dress gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter until now there's nothing left at all, right? And then who knows what's going to be in the next 5 or 10 years. There's not much left. How far can it go? But that's what's going on. We have a set way of life. It doesn't change, not next year, not next decade, not next century, not next millennium. These are static perimeters, right? So that's the second premise. We have a fixed way of life. And that fixed way of life dictates certain perimeters, certain principles that do not change. And they don't. So therefore you always find them in a turmoil as, okay, this is what we were doing that last century, but this century or this decade or this year or this season even, they go to new heights of outlandishness. So that's the second thing. We have a way of life, they don't have a fixed way of life. The third, and this is the point we're coming to today, is that also in Meccan society and in the Arab society, they didn't believe in a resurrection. We believe in a creator, we believe in a fixed way of life, and we also believe in a resurrection. There's going to be an account taken, day of judgment. And after the day of judgment, there will be an eternal life to be faced. They don't believe in that. So this was also a problem with the Quraysh and the Arab tribes who had now, from the distance of time, they had drifted away from any sort of belief in the hereafter. And this is also mentioned in the Quran that they would say, when we're turned to dust or turned to dry bones, we're going to be risen again. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would very succinctly reply to them, the one who has created you from nothing, for him to create you again, what's the problem? Why do you have an issue with that? Since he created you out of nothing in the first place, having created you initially to recreate you, it shouldn't be any more difficult. If anything, it should be easier. However, there's nothing easy or difficult with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All he needs to do is desire something and it happens. So this was another problem for them. The disbelievers were staunch in their denial. There was nothing, and this is quoted, or this is documented in the Quran itself. This is it's our worldly life. We live and we die, and that's the end. Here in the West, they say, when you're dead, you're done. So let the good times roll. When you're dead, you're finished. So just enjoy yourself. No, we don't believe that. And the Quran says, no, that is not the case. Actually, this world is but a fleeting life. It is a place of trial and tribulation, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't create this in vain, as they're saying. What they're saying is, it's been created, even though they had a belief in, a creator as such. But then they thought that, okay, after he's created, then it's up to them to do what they want. And after that, they're on their own. So did they think? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replies to this. Did you consider that we just created you in vain, in sport, without any higher objective? And you won't be returned back to us, despite the fact that you're, committing atrocities, tyranny, oppression, and it's going, unjustified, or it's going it's not being sorted out here in the world, right? So, the one who created all of this entire universe, in justice and in truth, so he would allow that scenario, to sustain and not be addressed? Definitely not. Everyone will be brought back, and every single action will be accounted for. So these were the types of ayats that were coming in Makkah. These were the themes. How to perform salat and all the injunctions of zakat and the injunctions even of hajj and all of these arkan of ibadat, they were not mentioned in detail. None of the sharia were mentioned. Halal and haram were not mentioned, except on some basic concepts. However, the details of all of these things were not mentioned in Makkah. These issues were being addressed, these fundamental issues, the foundation of belief in deen. This is the typical, characteristic of those early Meccan surahs. And so we find the narrative of the Quran, congruent with the situation that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was facing, the Muslims are facing, the stance of the Meccans. And it is, as I said, it was not a story of the ancients. We find the same scenario reoccurring. And we find the same thing today. Jahiliyyah today is no less than the Jahiliyyah of those days. I would suggest that it's even much more complicated and much more comprehensive and much deeper and worse. At least if you ask them, "Man khalaqa as-samawati wal arda?" They would say Allah. And today, who created the heavens and the earth? It just happened. That's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. It just happened, This microphone, one day I walked into the masjid and I was watching, and all of a sudden, plastic and metal and electronic components, they just sort of merged together, and lo and behold, there it is. Who's ready to believe that? This is a kind of a debate that took place with Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, and a mulhid of those areas. So it's not like just today. Even in his era, there was, who was contending, to prove that there's a creator. So they actually set up a meeting time. so, and all the people would gather and listen to this great debate. So the people came, and it was a particular day and a particular time, and the contestant shows up, and all the people show up, and Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, doesn't show up. They wait. See, he's chickened out. He's not going to come. Huh? So ultimately, when everybody's about ready to dissipate, now here comes the Imam. They said, "Oh, look at you! You've made this appointment and you're late for it, as though probably you didn't want to." No, actually, let me tell you what happened. First, listen to my story. It's very, it wasn't under my control. What happened was, between the meeting place and the Imam was the river, either the Dajla or the Euphrates, or whichever river it was, in Baghdad, perhaps. So he said, "Well, I came to the river and there was no boat. So how can I can't just, fly across the river. So I'm waiting for a boat, and no boat is coming. And then ultimately, the most amazing thing is that I was observing, and there was just some planks that were floating down, and they just started connecting with one another, and they just, right in front of my eyes, a boat was formed. And so I got on the boat, and now I'm here." They said, "Come on, really? What idiot is going to accept, this cock and bull story like this, He said, "Oh, you have a problem accepting that story?" Well, who wouldn't, Boards just come together and just form like that. Oh, you have a problem with that? So if you have a problem with that, you don't have a problem with this, entire creation of the heavens and earth and everything in between, just like that? Which is basically what they contend. It just happened like that. It's the most amazing thing that, I've ever heard. I can't understand. And most amazing part of it is that people who are considered scientists, they can hold this kind of opinion when they're working with the signs of the Qudrat of Allah, every moment of their existence. That's their profession. Mind-boggling. So, in any case, the Quran, which is coming in those days, is addressing these issues. We have not created this creation in vain. We have created for purpose. And everything that you're doing is going to be accounted for. So those who, as I mentioned, were not, totally hardened, through this blind submission to the tribal edicts. So they started accepting, the light, and they saw this light as guidance. And then they would look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as we mentioned again and again, as we're going to see over and over, and perhaps we'll also, at another time, we will start looking into what we call shama'il, or the characteristics, or the description of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in detail, and it's just mind-boggling. The perfection, the human perfection of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in every aspect, physically, internally, character, every aspect. So the people know Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As we mentioned earlier, he is the one who they called Sadiq al-Amin, the trustworthy, the truthful. And Martin Lings, he mentioned something in his book which I think was quite novel. He says that he's too full of truth to deceive, and he's too full of wisdom to be self-deceived. Did you follow that? So he's so full of truth, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just as they had been calling him as-Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful, the trustworthy. He was the most truthful and trustworthy person in their tribe that they have ever experienced. And also, they knew that he was full of wisdom. He was extremely wise and intelligent. And so he was too much wisdom that he would be self-deceived into thinking that he was a prophet when he wasn't. So the Quran is coming with these ayats, and they are, as we've mentioned many times, they were the Arabs, they were the original Arabs, and this language of the Quran, and the greatest thing that they had in their culture was their language. That was their culture, their language. And this Quran has come with language that is so far superior to anything that their poets or their novelists or their orators, novels, what I mean to say, those who would speak in prose, in their orations, and etc., and their poetry, they were, they used to, bask in their eloquence, they were in their. But this language of the Quran was just totally of another level. humanly impossible. And along with that, not only that, but the Prophet himself was a living example, and he was a manifestation of that Quran in flesh and blood. Okay? So those who were, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was kind enough to guide them, they accepted guidance. And so, what we have, those early Quranic, revelations were full of warnings and promises, what we call targheeb and tarheeb, warning the disbelievers and the deniers, and promising at the same time and motivating and encouraging the people to accept Iman, and those who have accepted it to remain on it and remain steadfast therein. And so the message gave a warning and a promise. So warning was impelling the believers to action. فَأَنذَرْتُكُمْ نَارًا تَلَظَّى لَا يَصْلَاهَا إِلَّا الْأَشْقَى الَّذِي كَذَّبَ وَتَوَلَّى. And I'm warning you of a terrible fire, the fire which Nabi ﷺ mentioned 70 times hotter than the fire of this world. And 70 times is many times used in the Arabic language, perhaps not as an exact figure, but moreover, expressing the multi times that it's going to be more than that particular object. So 70 times in so much more hot, perhaps beyond our conception. So this warning is coming, warning the believers, and that for the people of belief, it propels them and impels them towards action. And then, when the promises of adapting the Iman, which are again very characteristic of the Meccan surahs, the warning, the targheeb and the tarheeb, what will happen to the people of Iman, what will happen to the people of disbelief. So the people of Iman, they rejoice and they're filled with joy when they hear these promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ أَلَّا تَخَافُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَبْشِرُوا بِالْجَنَّةِ إِلَى آخِرِهِ. For example, those who say that their Lord is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then they remain steadfast upon تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ. The angels will descend upon them at the time of their death and give them the glad tidings, the time when, it's like the person in the dream. He's dreaming, that he's in Wonderland, or he's in a paradise kind of a situation, and he wakes up to come back to the realization that actually he's a prisoner on death row. So he would love to go back to his dream, right? But once you wake up from the dream, can you get back? It's gone. Now you have to face reality. And on the other hand, you have an individual who would be dreaming he's a prisoner on death row, and he's about to be hung, when he wakes up and back to the realization in the real situation that he was before, that he really lives in, which was he was the king and he had everything in his possession. And so you can imagine how happy he is when he wakes up. Right? So at the time of death, it's like that. Like we're sleeping now, and we'll wake up to the reality that we're going to have to face for eternity. And so the beginning of that is actually at the time of death, at which time this glad tiding will come to the people of Iman, those people who say our Lord is Allah, and they remain steadfast. And the angels, at the time of death, when people will be worried, am I going to be accepted or rejected? Is my Iman, is my Amal accepted? What will be my final abode and outcome? Those angels are there to give that glad tiding that you've made it, you're successful. No fear on you and no grief. No fear on you for what you're facing, and no grief for what you've left behind. Allah and His angels and His unseen system is there to protect you and your family behind you, and all those people of Iman, and all of your affairs behind. Don't worry about it. We have you covered, and in front of you, paradise forever and ever. So these are the type of ayats that come again and again, warning, at the same time giving these glad tidings and rejoicing, talking about the stories of the former people, etc. The whole basis is about establishing Tawheed, the oneness, the greatness, the mercy, the beneficence, and of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His attributes, and the outcome of adopting a life of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in His books, His messengers, and in the Day of Judgment, etc. So the believers hope to meet Allah, and the disbelievers have no such hope. فمن كان يرجو لقاء ربه فليعمل عملا صالحا ولا يشرك بعبادة ربه أحدا. So the people of Iman, they have the hope to meet with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they believe in a resurrection. Disbelievers have no hope to meet because they don't believe there's any life after death. So also, during this particular era, the Quraysh also in their, as we say, inad, in their arrogance, in their abstinence. So they're always asking Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam, okay, if you're really the Prophet, then turn these mountains into gold and silver. Send the angels down from the sky, you know. Bring agriculture into our, you know. Then ascend to the sky, come down and bring a book with you, and, you know. And all sorts of ridiculous, you know, propositions that they were. So generally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would order Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to reply that these type of ayats and the producing such type of events are not within my control. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to just, you know, fulfill the whims and the fancies of these foolish individuals, you know. That's not his system. However, at times, in fact, it did take place. An example was, and this is also in the early Meccan period, but when exactly this took place, it's not known exactly because in the Meccan period we don't have the exact history or the dates of things as specifically and as you know, as well defined as we have in the Medini period, because there was the number of people were less, the documentation of anything at that time was less. So what year everything, you know, happened, or what was the exact date of things happening? In any case, the splitting of the moon, which is mentioned in Surah Al-Qamar, Surah Al-Inshiqaq, and Surah Al-Qamar, it's known by these names. So, in the very beginning of that surah, this is mentioned. And that, the mention here is this event, and the riwayats of Bukhari, which are generally, you know, the riwayats of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and what he mentions is the splitting of the moon during the time of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam. Details of that incident are mentioned in other hadith, but not in Sahih Bukhari. In any case, as those riwayats point to, that as we mentioned, the mushrikeen were always asking, you know, give us a sign, give us a sign. And so perhaps even they asked, okay, if you're really the Prophet, then it was a full moon, the night was, you know, it was, they say around the, you know, perhaps the 14th, 15th or something like that, during the period of the complete full moon. Okay, if you're really the Prophet, then split that moon. So it just so happened that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, decided to show them exactly what they were requesting. And so Nabi alayhi salatu it's mentioned that he pointed to them and he said, Ishhadu. And he pointed, and the moon actually split into two. And it's mentioned, if you see here in Kaaba, right? So here's the Kaaba. This is what we call Jabal Quay Qa'an. Quay Qa'an. And this is Jabal Abi Qubais. Now all these mountains, the Saudis have now destroyed all of this area, so nothing of it is left. But when I first came to Makkah, so all these mountains were still there. So they say that as they were standing here, it was appearing as though the moon, part of it was on one side of the Jabal and one was on the other. Some say that it appeared that one side of the moon was here, on this side of Jabal Qa'an, and one side was all the way over here on the other side of Jabal Abi Qubais. In any case, what is certain is that what is mentioned in the riwayats of Bukhari is that the moon was split into two, which is more than sufficient. Okay? And so, he said, Nabi alayhi salatu, so witness, see it, ishhadu. So now, you asked to see the moon split, the moon has been split, now, what do you say? Sihrun mustamir. Fa'aradu wa qalu sihrun mustamir. They said, what it is that Muhammad has practiced his magic that we've been long saying that he's a practitioner and a master of. So this is merely the sorcery of Muhammad. You know? So in other words, As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran, you see, that اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر. This is mentioned Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the day of the hour of reckoning has come close. Because in the scheme of things, in the overall history, so obviously it has come close. Nabi alayhi sallam says, أنا والساعة بعثت والساعة كهاتين. I have been sent, in conjunction to the time of the last day, like these two fingers, like nothing left. Now it's 1400 years, and 1400 years, even if it was 14,000 years, in the overall scheme of things, is a very small amount of time. In any case, so the hour has come close, and the moon has been split, referring to that event. وَإِنْ يَرَوْا آيَةً. And if they see any ayat, any sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qudrat, and whether those ayats are the ayats of Quran, or whether those are ayats, in the creation, what do? يُعْرِضُوا يَقُولُوا السَّحْرٌ مُسْتَمِرٌ. They turn away and they say, this is nothing but continuous magic and sorcery. And in other places, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, had we sent down the angels and the dead were risen and talked to them, or whatever. And everything, of the unseen was unfolded in front of their eyes. Still, they wouldn't believe, other than if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted them to. So, the futility of these requests became quite manifest, and so we see that it was thereafter, we don't find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, responding to their requests. But moreover, when they ask for ayats, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points to them the ayats that are much more, perhaps, even convincing than that which they are asking for. Just look at anything around you. أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبْلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Look at the camels. Look at the sky. Look at the mountains. Look at the sea. Look at the earth. Look at that creation. Are these things themselves not signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qudra? And so these type of ayats continuously come in the Meccan period, and they're asking for miracles. So look at anything. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ وَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. Even in yourselves. You yourself are a living miracle. You yourself, O you insan, O you human being, you are a testimony and a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qudra. Look at yourself. But of course, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets to go astray, there's no guidance for them. Okay, so they are invited to reflect on the creation. Therefore, we find many of the ayats in that Meccan period, they point, to various aspects of the creation, which point to the greatness, the wisdom, and the beneficiary nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in creating all of those things for us. هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ لَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. He's created everything in this world for us. So we find these ayats coming down, and in reflecting on these things, we should, be in a state of amazement and wonder. And as we mentioned, you don't see the camels, you don't see the earth and the sky and the mountains, and that should also produce, a feeling of praise and gratitude. After looking around you, looking at yourselves, your own creation, and so all of these ayats are coming that should be producing these. And the lucky people, accepted Islam, and it had that effect. And Surah Al-Fatiha is the epitome of that whole concept of praise. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us how to praise Him. And this is also one of the Meccan surahs, the most important, and the very opening statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message to mankind, Al-Fatiha itself. And then ultimately, the central theme of Islam itself, also Surah Al-Ikhlas was sent down in this area. And the whole central theme of Islam, Tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say, Allah is one. Allahu Samad. He is the self-sustaining. All are sustaining through Him. He is the one alone who is self-sustaining, and everything else sustains through Him. Samad. And needless of anyone or anything. Self-sustaining. Self-sufficient. And everything else is totally, is totally dependent upon Him. Lam yalid. He doesn't beget. He is unlimited and perfect and limitless. Beget, that's a quality of the creation. Those who have a need for progeny. Allah has no need for anything, and it's not behooving of Him. Lam yalid wa lam yulad, and He hasn't been begotten, and He hasn't been born. Neither is anything born of Him, nor has He been born from anyone. He always has been, He is, and always will be. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, and nothing is like Him. Nothing can compare to Him even. Neither in their being, neither in their names, neither in their qualities. So these are the surahs, and this is the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down, and this is the response. Minhum shaqiyun wa sa'id, and some were fortunate and some were unfortunate by the taqdir of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now, next week, inshallah, we'll look a little bit at further, that era, and some of the peculiar instances of the different, rancors and enmity which caused, family fraction, and ultimately led to, an increase in hostilities and animosity, and ultimately to the hijrah to Abyssinia, to Ethiopia. So, inshallah, next week, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Any questions? Okay, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.